Hello, I'm Dr. Amber Love Johnson, and this is the EduCurious podcast, where we highlight exceptional educators and dive deep into complex issues. Today's guest is the one and only Dr. Christy Lamb from the Modern Principal podcast. Actually, she's the one who inspired this podcast and she inspired me to get my doctorate. So I am starstruck, and she is on my show, and I am so excited.
Well,
So good
thank
morning and
you.
welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That was really kind of you. Thank you.
I started listening to you and Karen
Mhm.
on one of the episodes of the Empowered Principal podcast with
Okay.
Angela Kelly coaching. And then I was like, wait, it redefined how I saw leadership in education, because normally you see like an older gentleman leading the show. And then there's these fabulous women, so fashionable, talking about real issues. And I was like, hang on, wait, what?
I love that. That's literally exactly why we started the Modern Principal because um I remember my first year of being a principal and I had, like any new principal, you have all kinds of issues and all kinds of problems. And I remember my very first year, I actually had a staff issue very quickly in the beginning of the year. And I only knew one person. I was newer to the district, so I didn't have a wealth of friendships or principal pals or anything like that. So I called the one guy I knew, and he basically said, well, you've just got to go in and you've got to set the standard and you've got to tell it to her straight that that's not going to be okay anymore. And I was like, wow, well, yeah, that might be cool for, a 50-year-old dude, but I am currently a 30-year-old woman, and this woman's been teaching longer than I've been alive. So I don't know that that's going to come off the same way. And just feeling like being a younger principal in the room, but just talking to Karen, who was also a principal at the time, and I said, I just feel like there's a lot of people like us who you can't approach things the exact same way as some of your older, wiser counterparts.
Truly, it's such a delicate dance for that. And how you come across is completely different. Every day, we as women in leadership come against that.
Yep.
So, what are some advice that you have to other women leaders in education?
I think what makes you the most confident and to live out your values is to be very explicit about what they are. So, taking time to make sure that you know exactly what your values are in this role and the values that you have for your teachers, and then making sure that you share them very directly with your staff. For me, dignity with students is always the most important. I have been in a lot of buildings where sometimes teachers don't always speak to students with dignity. And I get kids can be hard, kids can be disrespectful, kids can be unhinged. And also, I always feel that they deserve to be treated with dignity because ultimately that's going to make everything work a whole lot better. I make sure I share that at the very beginning of the year with any new building that I'm in, is that this is one of my number one things, is that we treat people with dignity. And explaining what that looks like to me. Then additionally, it gives you another leg to stand on when you address it. So when you really outline your values from the get-go, it just makes those conversations on the back end a lot easier. It's just easier to be confident about your decision making and when you have to address those things too.
And one of the three-prong approaches that you use in your podcast are
Mhm.
the scholar, system, and soul.
Yeah.
And that to me is important to think about all those aspects. The word dignity hits on each of those. So tell me a little bit more about how you frame your leadership values with those three focus areas.
Usually most initiatives can align with your values, whether that is like a PBIS or it can be some sort of, instructional initiative in terms of direct instruction or the science of reading. But I always go through those three prongs of scholar, system, and soul to make sure, usually the soul, that is the value side, right? Making sure that it aligns. And then also the soul side is going to be, how am I going to share this information, or how am I going to implement whatever this is in a way that staff will accept, that students will accept, that families will accept, depending on whatever that is. How am I going to think about the human side of it in terms of, I can have all the scholar and system in the world, but when they make mistakes with that, how am I going to respond with that? Or how am I going to prevent mistakes? Or how am I going to navigate those pieces? I have a tendency to focus on the scholar and the system side. Like that's my natural, entry point, sometimes I have to start with that soul side so that I remember the human piece as I'm going into the scholar and the system. So, scholar is going to be the research and evidence that underpins whatever decision or whatever initiative that we're working with. This is really important because I've been trying to be intentional about reading research on a regular basis. As I'm doing that, what I'm realizing is that a lot of the things that we were maybe taught in our preparation programs as teachers and even as leaders is not actually rooted in evidence. We want to make sure that it's not just edu theory that we're using to make our decisions. And then we have the system side. Anything that you are going to be doing repeatedly must have a system to work. You have to have meetings on the calendar. You have to have a committee to run it. You have to have certain things, and I call them like the four core, and you have to make sure that those things work over and over and over again. Otherwise, it's all going to be dependent on you as the leader, and that is a surefire way to make sure that it burns out and doesn't work.
I want to hear a little bit about your leadership pathway. It sounded as of late a bit circuitous and how things have been.
That's a really nice and large word to use to describe it.
So, what did you do and what have you felt the most fulfilled doing?
Well, I was on a really linear path in education. I started as obviously like a classroom teacher. I taught middle school ELA and then moved into a teaching and learning coach at the elementary level. And then went into an admin intern role. And so it's basically intern, you're on a teacher's salary and you can't do every single role that the administrators do. And then moved into an assistant principal role and then straight from assistant principal to principal. Very linear for the first chunk of my career. Then hit just kind of some life situations, some career situations, and I knew I needed a change. Sometimes I make decisions really fast in my life. I ended up leaving the principalship and moving into consulting with a national consulting company and really, really enjoyed that. Then got offered a position in national sales. It was hard to turn down. It's a company that I've known and loved for a lot of years and went and worked for them. Ultimately decided that sitting behind a Zoom screen and traveling all day, every day was really unfulfilling. I actually wrote like a whole Substack on it because I ended up going back into an assistant principal role after doing those pieces and just being like, I like what I'm doing and there are fulfilling parts of it, but ultimately my day to day is not with teachers and not with kids. And I felt a little bit dead inside, not having that human interaction, particularly with teachers and kids. I then went back into public ed as an assistant principal for the past couple of years. And what's funny that you asked that, I haven't even announced it, but I am moving into higher ed next school year in a principal preparation program. I'll be a full time assistant professor next year teaching aspiring leaders. Surprise!
Terrific. What did you really notice or what stood out to you when you went from that linear path out of it and then back to an assistant principal? What were those things you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make sure I'm more aware of this because now that I know more, I can do more?
That is such a good question. I have had more fun in the last 2 years coming back to the assistant principalship than I've probably ever had in my whole career because of the perspective that the principalship and working corporate has given me. So as a principal, you have the weight of everything on your shoulders. And particularly, I was a solo elementary principal. So I didn't have an assistant to support in that role. Every single discipline fell on me, every single strategic plan, initiative, and assessment score, right? That all falls on you as the lead. And then moving into corporate and just seeing how big the world of education is. And I'm just talking about the US, let alone, globally, but just seeing how many players are in education, how decisions get made at a national and state level. And then realizing that us and our own little school bubbles are quite small and just getting to focus on my kids and my teachers was just almost incredibly empowering in terms of I don't have to be thinking about these macro situations. I just get to focus on my people and doing what's best for them each and every day to the best of my ability. And it really gave me a sense of freedom. And I wish I had had that perspective in the principalship, not feeling like every single situation and everything single decision that I had to carry the weight of the world.
Did you realize that you were missing the fun component prior?
No, because I thought I was doing the fun component. I would dress up for dress up days. I hung out with the kids in the cafeteria. I had inside jokes with teachers. I had good relationships with everyone. I thought I did at least. But what I think I was missing was the lightness as opposed to maybe just the fun. The last couple of years, I've had more of a lightness about the role and understanding that I don't have to be perfect at every single thing. I don't have to make some of the biggest decisions that our country is facing. All I have to do is go in and be the best I can be each day and provide what my students and staff need with the perspective that I have now and not thinking that everything matters so much. I wish I had had that perspective like my first time through as a lead principal.
So, what do you feel like your leadership style is currently?
I think that I have high expectations and high support. I have very high expectations of staff and students, and honestly, even families. And I counter that with high support. So, as a teacher, I expect you to use evidence based practices. I expect you to treat all students with dignity. I expect you to be on the ball and track data and all of those pieces. But I'm going to provide some of the best PD you'll ever have. I'm going to make sure that you know exactly what the expectation is. I'm going to give you the best feedback you've ever had. I have really high expectations of others and expectations of myself so that I can provide the supports they need to get there.
So, in conjunction with that, how else do you support your teachers and your staff at your school emotionally, socially, and academically?
Some of the best ways that we as leaders can actually support our staff and our team emotionally and socially is actually through being good managers. So I pride myself on making sure that I have strong communication so that there aren't very many surprises. And if there are surprises, I own them and apologize that I miscommunicated. I make sure that I have really strong committees and shared leadership so that I have staff input on big decisions and we have clear systems to make decisions and then also make things happen. I make sure that I have good meetings and professional development. So, if you attend a meeting that I am leading or you attend a professional development that I am hosting, you're going to have a really clear outcome of what I want to accomplish, and we're going to make it there. I'm very intentional about deposits with staff and my team in terms of making sure that they are hearing the good things from me, that I am making investments in them, that I am trying to do like the fun culture builders, but I'm doing it in a systematic way so that it hits every single person and maybe not just favorites, because I want every single person on my team to know how much I value them and their strengths.
And do you feel like that transfers directly into the subculture of a teacher's classroom?
I think that schools really are a reflection of the principal. I have been in so many different buildings, both as somebody who works in them and then also as that consultant, right? It is fascinating to me how a school takes on the personality of the principal. I've never not seen it happen in some capacity in a building. That's why the people that we hire to be our leaders is incredibly important because ultimately your whole staff takes on at least some of their habits and some of their personality, even if it doesn't seem obvious in the moment.
What do you feel like is your biggest superpower or strength as a leader?
I think my biggest superpower as a leader is being able to see the big picture and the big goals, and then be able to map out the steps and the players to get there. And then within the steps and within the people, within the players, I'm able to think about each individual person and what they can bring to those steps to get us to where we want to go. I can take into consideration their individual strengths and their individual weaknesses and how to use them within those individual steps to get to our goal. I'm constantly thinking about what does staff need within that step? What professional development do we need? What sort of meetings do we need to be hosting? What sort of communication needs to happen? What other stakeholders will be impacted along the way? And so I think I'm able to take that very big picture, the very big goal, and map out each and every piece to get there.
Did you acquire this knowledge from hands on or some of the theoretical knowledge from the books and the courses that you've learned, or is it just a combination, like all of the things?
Probably a combination. I specifically remember though, when I became an instructional coach, we got some training in cognitive coaching. There was one thing that I hadn't heard it before, but it was called systems thinking. And the way that it was explained to me just stuck with me forever. And I wish I had a model to show you, but it was one of those, it's almost like a fidget toy. And it's like whenever you move it in, it gets smaller and you can stretch it out and it gets bigger. And you can like kind of move it in different ways, and then the toy itself will move in different ways. And the way she described it was, every single decision that we make impacts something else. So if we make a decision this way, this moves out. If we make a decision this way, this moves out. It always really stuck with me that everything we do as a leader has a ripple effect in some way. And so I've just always been really cognizant of how is this going to affect my staff, and not just my strong staff. How's it going to affect my weak staff? How's it going to impact my new staff? How's it going to impact my apathetic staff? How's it going to impact my best staff? And then within that, thinking about the different ways to support and try to be preventative and try to be proactive with those pieces. How's that decision going to impact my families, my families that don't have the same amount of resources? How's it going to impact my families who don't speak English, right? Like, so always trying to think about all of these different pieces as I go through any decision or initiative in my leadership. Systems thinking, I remember distinctly learning about it, and it just like stuck with me forever.
It makes me think a lot about like reflective practices within like knowing who you are as a person, your personality, like the Gallup Strength Finder, the Myers Briggs test. Like, what are the things that have stuck out and really transferred well into this career?
So I am a huge Enneagram fan. I know it kind of had a moment in terms of its popularity, and it maybe has passed. And yes, I think we're both three in our pink blazers. And I told Amber I actually was going to wear that necklace too, and we could have been twins. I actually did Enneagram with my staff at one of my buildings, and we all took it and we did like weekly activities in the lounge each week where we kind of reflected on our Enneagrams. And it's one of those things that sounds a little like frou frou, woo woo, like unnecessary. But when I tell you, it helped us understand each other more than anything else I've ever done in terms of being able to see where each of us comes from in our intent and our fear and our worry. And something that maybe will drive you crazy about a colleague. And then you start to realize the lens through which they see the world. And all of a sudden, you have more grace for them. What it did too for our staff was it made talking about strengths and weaknesses a little bit more objective rather than so personal. So I know as an Enneagram 3, one of my weaknesses is that I do focus on status, and I'm focused on how things look and how things are perceived. And that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but it gives you the language to talk with people. And they can say, Christy, I think you're focusing a little bit too much on the PR side here and not on the implementation. And oh yeah, okay, that's not personal. That is a weakness of mine.
What is one of your biggest accomplishments in the educational world?
I came to a building as a leader at one point, and there was kind of a divide between students with and students without. This is like a mini example, but class parties weren't very equitable in terms of, if this class had good room moms, they would have incredible, elaborate parties. Like, I kid you not, with like an ice sculpture or like a chocolate fountain. And then if you were in a classroom with maybe not those room moms, your party would look much different. Obviously, that is kind of a surface level example, but it gives you an idea of then what happens academically and support wise with those students. I made sure that our focus was on equity and dignity, and that every single student who walked through our door got a similar high caliber experience. I wanted every single kid to experience a very similar experience, but I had high expectations for that experience, right? And through the course of the years and doing professional development and making sure I shared my values and was really explicit with them and showing people what I meant, I remember we had a meeting where we were welcoming our new teachers, and we had a few veteran teachers there. And we were going around, and I wanted you to say your name to introduce yourself to these new teachers. I wanted you to share one thing that you loved about the school. Like, what was the one thing you loved about the school? And I had a veteran teacher who said, "Hi, my name is Miss So and so. And my favorite thing about our school is that we treat all students with love and dignity, and that wasn't always the case before Miss Lamb came here, and it is the case now." And I was like, "That's it! I did it! Like, I could retire." Just for one to have that be the case in the school, and then to another to have a staff member credit me with it was just something that I still think about all the time.
That's powerful. I work in a Title I middle school, so our population is, here all the way up to here. And I've thought a lot about school field trips. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as like you're talking about class parties and equity?
I am of the belief that in a school, everyone's access and everyone's experience should be largely similar. Not to mean that you can't have special bonds and relationships with different teachers or different lessons or anything like that. I just don't think that you should come out of school with vastly different experiences, both socially or curriculum or academically. You should have the chance to have the same experience, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're English speaking or non English speaking. No matter how you come into our school, I want you to have similar experiences, but I want those experiences to be amazing for every single kid. We have to do everything we can to provide that equity in a systematic way.
Besides the challenge of coming in younger as a female leader in education, what else have been some of your biggest challenges in education?
Oh, are we being honest or are we being
We are. Your
I think that the biggest challenges right now as a leader, we're seeing a big shift in parenting. Quite honestly, it's even been bigger since post COVID. That was one thing that changed for me. I was a principal in COVID, and then I left for a couple of years and then came back when it was definitely post COVID. I see a difference in terms of the trust that families have in our schools. I see a difference in the trust that families have in teachers and educators in general. And that lack of trust trickles down to lack of accountability for kids. That is just a huge difference in terms of how we are supporting students behaviorally and social emotionally. And I don't know that I have the answer right now, but that's definitely been a challenge in the last few years.
On that note, with the behavior component, how do you approach high caliber expectations for students with behavior along with the dignity and respect? Like, you do need to hold someone accountable for slapping their friend in the face in the hallway, but also there's so many factors. What's your approach?
So, first and foremost, particularly with behavior, is we have got to make sure that our teachers are trained in evidence based practices. The 8 universal tier 1 supports are incredibly important. Sometimes we look at things like PBIS or, like universal effective practices, and we are like, yeah, but that doesn't work for extreme behaviors. We can never control kids' behaviors, but what we can do is control the environment that either makes them more likely to happen or less likely to happen. I cannot stress enough that the proactive is the most important thing we can do, and to train our teachers to do it so well that it's second nature to them and that they don't know any other way to do it. On the back end of that, when we do have students who buck those systems, who those universal supports don't necessarily work for in the first go around, is to make sure that when they do make a mistake, that we do not engage at the level they are engaging. We have to have our calm be contagious. And even when our calm isn't contagious, we still have to speak to kids proactively rather than reactively. So just because a kid calls you a curse word does not mean that you are going to respond with a snappy comeback, right? That's not dignity. Dignity in being the adult means you are staying calm and you are staying professional and you are saying, I can see this is hard for you right now. I'll get you some help. As opposed to, what did you just say to me? Or, whatever that looks like. That's where the dignity piece comes in, because when we respond without dignity, it is never going to make the problem smaller.
Absolutely. I have some questions about the the theory side of everything, you went back and you got your doctorate. Tell me what inspired you to do that and how it's helped you right now in this part of life.
Well, as we discussed, I'm an Enneagram 3, so I wanted the title of doctor. I wanted to have that in front of my name. I also, at the time that I started my doctorate, I was, like we had talked about, on that linear path to essentially like central office or a future superintendent role. And I'm not saying that that's even out of my path at this point, but I knew that I wanted at some point to move out of the principal role. And I also knew that I wanted to adjunct. I just love the work that it requires to help new principals and to train up the next leaders. I knew I wanted to at least adjunct. I knew I would have to have my doctorate potentially to be able to do that. I also am just obsessed with learning, and I love being in school. I love being in, K-12. I love being in college. I just love school and I love learning. Why not pay and, you know, continue to put my family's money into another degree?
So, with that, the degree, I'm assuming, I'm hopeful, will open more doors and career options. But what other careers are out there in education that you've seen now that you've seen all these different pathways?
I understand the challenges in public ed. And while I want to do everything in my power to keep the best people in public education, I also understand that it might not necessarily be for everyone forever, right? I know that it's hard and somewhat unsustainable for some people. So I also believe that it's important to have good people in education adjacent roles too, right? We want the people who are selling our curriculum to be really knowledgeable about what it looks like to teach and learn in a classroom. There's definitely options in ed tech and curriculum companies. There are definitely consulting opportunities across. I've also seen people who move into corporate that is not education, but in education roles. So delivering PD in a human resources or an engineering firm, something like that. Moving into higher education where maybe you're teaching future teachers or future leaders.
What is your favorite inspirational TED Talk or podcast or book you're reading within this focus of education?
That is a hard one. I have recently, in the last couple of years, this is really nerdy. I've recently just started subscribing to journals, and I get a stack of about 4 to 6 journals each month, depending on, some of them are quarterly. And so I've been trying to read research in its purest form. And it's been excellent because obviously I think we all are having more and more limited attention spans as we continue to use reels and social media and short form. It's forced me to go back to some long form reading, and as well, not even just long form, but like hard reading, if that makes sense, where I have to use my brain a little bit more to understand each and every component of the research. I know that that's not necessarily one. I could never choose a single book or a single TED Talk or speech or anything, but that's one thing that I've been trying to do lately is read original research.
So, on that point, good or bad, social media, what do you see as good, bad, ugly, exciting of the social media movement?
I love that you can find such niche experiences within social media. Like, how amazing is it that we have all of these principles on social media that we can connect with and add to our professional network? And you can see that other people are having the same issues as you, or have the same wins as you, or maybe they're having wins you're not having. You want to connect to find that out. One obvious, probably negative side effect of social media is that it can be somewhat of an echo chamber. I try to be mindful of that in terms of who I'm following, and that I know the algorithm is sending me very similar things that probably align with what I already believe to be my values, being cognizant of that, and that I'm only receiving information that is likely already aligned with me. So how do I make sure that I'm also receiving information that might challenge me? I am so excited. So we took a break from Modern Principal podcast, just with life and jobs and changes, and we are back in action. And if you haven't listened, we would love for you to join back on. That's just been so fun to start doing that again. I also have just been doing a lot of consulting work and coaching work that has been getting me up and excited every morning. And then my new job, I'm really excited for. I'm just excited to be able to like do what I do through the modern principle and through like drchristylamb.com. I'm excited to be able to do that as my like day job.
So I was listening to one of your most recent episodes. I had to brush up on it because I was listening to every single one, and then my life got busy too.
Get it?
And you have new music, you have some cool sponsorships, but what are your short-term goals to grow and sustain your podcast?
Short-term goals are to be consistent with episodes, and that's it. We're going quantity over quality, which you may end up experiencing, but just to be consistent. And that's the hardest thing of any endeavor is just to be consistent. You get caught up in being a perfectionist. You get caught up in wanting everything you do to be the best. And sometimes you just need to remember that the goal is to show up, and not every single thing we put out is going to be the best. You're going to hear a lot of sound quality issues, right? Or video quality. But our goal is to always make sure that we get it out and that we do our best. And if it's perfect, great. And if it's not, which is more likely, then that'll be great too.
I'm loving the time that we spent together, but any like big thoughts or ideas you want to share?
Just thank you so much for having me. This was fun just to talk shop and get to talk about a lot of different topics that are top of mind for all the educators out there.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we get to keep up and connect again a little bit later.
Absolutely.
So whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just EduCurious, join the community as we explore various educational topics and learn from each other. We will see you next time.